Ladies and gentlemen, from everywhere, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I'm glad to welcome you to another appointment of this cycle of international video conferences dedicated to tramways and other means of transport. Today we have a presentation made from Italy by a true native Argentinian, Marcela Luque, an ATTS member, an active member, I should say. Marcela will talk about the history of tramways in the capital, Buenos Aires. This presentation will be done in English. At the end of the evening, there will be a space for any questions in English or in Italian. And you can also use the chat in every moment during the presentation. The complete program of the forthcoming presentation is available on our internet site, English section. And I remind you that next presentation is scheduled on a Tuesday, June 18th. And Martin Gut, an active ATTS member, will talk from Switzerland about the Zurich Tram Museum. Thank you. And before giving the floor to Marcela, I repeat everything in Italian. Signore e signori, benvenuti a un'altra presentazione del ciclo di conferenze internazionali dedicate ai tram e agli altri mezzi di trasporto. Questa sera abbiamo una presentazione un po' particolare perché è fatta dall'Italia, ma da un'argentina, da un'italo-argentina per la precisione, che è nostra socia attiva, che è Marcela Luque. E Marcela ci parlerà della storia dei tram nella capitale argentina, Buenos Aires. La presentazione sarà fatta in inglese. Alla fine della serata ci sarà il consueto spazio per domande in inglese o in italiano, ma potete anche usare la chat in ogni momento durante la presentazione. Vi ricordo che il programma completo delle prossime videoconferenze è disponibile sul sito internet della ATTS e che la prossima presentazione tra 15 giorni, quindi martedì 18 giugno, sarà da Zurigo e Martin Gut, un attivo socio della TTS, ci presenterà il Museo del Tram di Zurigo. Grazie e ora passo la parola a Marcela. Prego Marcela.
Grazie. I won't be repeating in Italian everything I said, so I hope English is fine for all of you. Slides will be in English too. Please feel free to interrupt me because I can't see that while presenting, it's not possible for me to see or to take a look at the chat. I'll be focusing mostly on historical aspects of what was one of the 8 most important networks. During the 20s, it had 800 kilometers. And this first picture is what remains now. Okay, we can see the rails covered by the pavement and the same street, and there's nothing left of that because there are currently no tramways in Buenos Aires since 1963. So the word tranguais, I will tell you later what it means. It means tramways, but how we get there. So that was the common word, as we used to say tramvai. In Turin, they would say, people from Buenos Aires would say tranguai. Okay, do you see the slides now? Okay, so yes. This is, okay, thank you. No, it was my mistake, sorry. This is a summary of the contents we are going to see, and this picture is, it used to be a very old, one of the first ones, I would say, tramway station. One of those that remains is not exactly in Buenos Aires, but in a neighborhood that, in a city already, that tramways helped to create, okay? It was built in 1890s. It served as a tramway station until the beginning, the 19th century, 1908. And currently, since the 35, I guess, it's the headquarters of a scout group. So let's take a look first at the content, okay? What was going on in Buenos Aires in the 1860s, or what had went on in the past, which that was the worst part. In the past, there had been a very important for Argentinian history dictator called Juan Manuel de Rosas. So all these ideas that you may have about Argentina and Buenos Aires, the gaucho, lactancia, the big countryside, the cows, and whatever, belong to this period. Okay, so attention was mostly focused in the countryside, in cattle raising and agriculture. There were very important social inequities and a complete setback in both cultural and infrastructure terms. All right. It ended up that he left the country. He died, by the way, somewhere in England. So politicians found themselves in a situation in which they knew that everything was supposed to be done, but the means were not that important, or definitely they were not in the condition of being able to do. So this is pretty much the context in which we are. What you see is a picture of how Buenos Aires looked in the 1860s. I've read that some of you say are 10 years ago or 20 years ago, so you can imagine how much it changed during only a decade. There were, at the moment, always in the 60s, less than 200,000 inhabitants. There was not urban planning in terms of roads, housing, water, and so on. But at the same time, industries were raising, and they were being located mostly in Buenos Aires. Why? Because the port is in Buenos Aires. And this will determine everything, since the railways to the tramways as well. Buenos Aires, however, was still a very interesting city. Why? Because it was the capital city of the country. They had custom duties because of the port, which was there. It was becoming highly cosmopolitan because of immigration. This was the first moment in which immigration was opened. It wasn't very well structured, as it was, for instance, in the States, in the sense that people would just jump in there and will remain in Buenos Aires. So it was getting drastically crowded, we may say. All this situation became very attractive for European investors mostly, particularly the British and some Belgian investors too. But the icon in this period, which is a period from the 1890s until the 30s, the 20-something, is the period of the greatest development of the whole country and Buenos Aires in particular. So, as I said before, they wanted, or they had to do everything. They had to start everything from scratch without any kind of means. So they asked themselves the question, which business model we should introduce in order to attract investors. There were several, but the most common one was the concession contract, particularly in the segment of transportation. What were, or how were these concession contracts done? Private capitals, the full investments was on the shoulders of the investors, whereas the state, the government, the local councils will just contribute to facilitate in terms of laws, regulations, and any other kind of measure. Okay, so this was what the public authority proposed, and so many investors saw or perceived a wonderful business on this. That's why we are going to find out that mostly companies will be in British hands, and a few in German hands, and others in Belgian hands. In this context, the first improvement they did was the railway. And that's how the tram born in Buenos Aires as the younger brother of the railway. The story here becomes very different to what we're using in Europe, but much more similar to probably to what the Americans know or the Australians may know. So this was on a Saturday in August 1857. From a station that doesn't exist anymore, we see there Colon Theatre, the station used to be right there, operated by an Italian immigrant, Alfonso Covazzi. La Porteña, that was the first steam locomotive, made the first ride, and that was the first time that the train was running in Buenos Aires. The idea of having a railway to connect what is an extremely, remarkably vast country wasn't indifferent. So I would say that more than utilities, probably, it was the railway which helped and trigger definitely the Argentinian development. That same steam locomotive that we can see also in the picture, that is the picture of the first ride, served for 40 years. And if you happen to be in Buenos Aires, you can go for a day outside the city in Lucan, the Transport Museum. You can still see her there. It's very well made up and looking wonderful. The other picture is the inside of what it used to be that train station. So this was the first step of many others that had to be made in order to connect all the Argentinian cities, the few that there were at that moment, among each other. After that, many other companies, always British founded, British capitals, started to build more railways. But every company had its own train station. So passengers probably coming from north and going to the center should take a train until Buenos Aires, change train station, and then in order to take the other train to go to, I don't know, Mendoza or whatever they wanted to go. And on top of that, as I said before, the city was getting crowded in a very short time, okay, because of immigration. Immigrants would mostly remain in Buenos Aires, but living in Buenos Aires was terribly expensive and accommodations were not okay. We had, maybe you've heard of that, the conventillos, many families living in the same couple of rooms. So they started to look for a second solution, probably moving a bit out of the city. So the first need that they had was commuting to and from railway stations and to and from work, because many industries were in Buenos Aires at the time. So we're going to see that from this moment on, a second type of city born, in the sense that those founded by the Spanish colonists had the square in the center, then the church, the school, or the city council had that structure, whereas many other cities all over Argentina were born because of the railway. So what you have is a main street which ends where the train station is. And it's in that main street that you may have shops and, I don't know, amusement and pubs and bars and any kind of entertainment. So this is something that we don't have in Europe, because by the time the tram get to Europe, the cities had already been built and developed and were in a very good shape. As an exchange, what they have is, as Americans and Australians, the possibility of counting wider spaces. And this was the case of the tramway. The first one that realized of this need, particularly of changing train stations, was Ferrocarril del Norte. the owner of the railways, bringing people, passengers to the north of the country, Salta, Jujuy, the very, very north. So in that scenario is where we find the first tram ride. This is not the picture of the first ride. Of course, this is a picture by the turn of the century from the tram station. Okay, so the first ride was in 1863. It was an initiative from Ferrocarril del Norte. The station had been built near the customs office, which is there. You see what you see, the horses should be back here. The station doesn't exist anymore, of course, and it started as an experimental service. Actually, it was a very short line because it was just 2 kilometers line. But after 2 years, it stopped being an experiment and started to be a regular service. After that, many other train companies, railway companies realized of the business that was there. So they started to request permissions to the council to build up their own tram lines. Of course, people living in Buenos Aires consider that it used to be called La Gran Aldea, the kind of the big town or village. It was a very nice village full of huge houses, so people didn't trust this new and revolutionary means of transport. They consider it an attack to public safety. So they made a complaint to the city council, and the city council 4 years, after the first ride in 1867, decided that from that moment on, a groom will go with a horse a few steps, 20 meters ahead the tram, announcing with a horn, a cornetín, it's the word in Spanish, that the tram was coming back. Okay, so this was, how can I say, like an icon. And then we are going to find out that many tangos were even dedicated to this icon called El Mayoral, which comes from a Spanish word that had nothing to do with means of transport. Then, as we said, mostly we had British entrepreneurs at the beginning, were the railways company, but still by the 70s, by 1868 particularly, many local entrepreneurs realized that many other lines were needed because the city was growing up very, very quickly. So the first concession contract that was provided by the city council to a private entrepreneur was in 1868, and the entrepreneur was a French surname, which was Lacrosse, but everyone pronounces it as Lacrosse. So if you happen to be there and you say, can I go to Lacrosse station, they will understand. If you say Lacrosse, no one will understand where you want to go. So from now on, sorry for mispronouncing this, but it's going to be named as Lacrosse. Lacrosse, the whole family, the two brothers started the tram line, will be very, very important for the rest of the tram history, when just a few companies will survive, and Lacrosse will be the local entrepreneur which will manage to survive to the big, big merge. So from that period on, the picture, of course, is not the one of the first ride, but it's indeed a Lacrosse tramway in the middle of a flood in what is now La Calle Corrientes, which is a very central street and very, very crowded as well. After that ride, other companies started to request the permits to build tram lines. We have Compañía 11 de Septiembre, and this is very funny because both companies made the first ride on the same day. It was in February 1869, Mardi Gras. From the same point to the same point, Plaza de Mayo 11, by parallel streets. Of course, all this operation was founded by themselves, by the same investors. The success was complete, a huge success. Citizens would go and ask to the city council for more tram lines. The tramway in this moment starts being called Tranguai with the G, which is nothing but the British word or the English word, sorry, mispronounced. And as it happened with the railways, we will see some neighborhoods either created or even transformed by means of the tramway. In the end of all these companies, and we're going to see the evolution, this is just a list of the most important ones. Of some of them, there is a complete lack of information, particularly those that were local founded. In the end, you see that I have highlighted La Croce and La Compañía de Tranvías Anglo-Argentina, because those will be the most or the only ones surviving the evolution. So this is the picture we have less than 20 years after the first horse-drawn tram. By 1888, always La Croce realized that Buenos Aires started to get covered by tram lines, but how about the suburbs and even the countryside? So he created this wonderful project too, which was the one of the suburban tramway, which is called El Tramway Rural. So now we see La Estación Chacarita in the first picture, how it looked at the time and how it looks now, not this year, but in the last decade, let's say. This was a very long line. It had more than 100 kilometers and it covered Buenos Aires. It started in Buenos Aires to Zárate. Consider that every 16 or 17 kilometers, the horses had to be changed, had to be replaced. It was converted to steam in 1892 and later on became part of the Ferrocarril Central. So if you happen to read some Argentinian tramway history or Buenos Aires, I'm certain that you're going to bump into El Tramway Rural. Another innovation brought always by La Croce Tramways, that wasn't the real name of the company, but it's shorter to call it that way, were the Hearst tram, which he inaugurated in 1888. And there were two possibilities. Number one was the car called Deluxe, which is the pictures we are seeing. You see that it was completely funerary and was meant only for that purpose, whereas there was another service, cheaper and even for free for those dying in prison and for poor people. In that case, only the motor car was black, but regular cars out of service were used for this second class service. As you can see, there is in the middle a place to place the coffin, and then the seats were independent. There was a steam tram too in Buenos Aires. This was a different company, not La Croce. It served for 14 years. And it was Tranvía del Oeste, connecting Buenos Aires always with the western side of the city, which started to be populated in that moment. The idea of this tram was to transport meat, particularly to Mataderos. In Mataderos, we have the slaughterhouse. From Mataderos to Floresta, in which there was the meat market. But it was such a success that throughout time, passenger cars need to be added to it. Because, as we said, the suburb, where the western part was getting crowded, so people needed a mean of transport to get to work. That was the main reason. This is the picture we have by the turn of the century, that is to say, by the end of the 1890s and the beginning of the 20th century. In 1873, a decade after the first ride, we had 6 tram companies transporting pretty much 12 million passengers. In the 80s, companies become 7. Stations, we have 11 tram stations and 260 cars. We have 12 tram companies before the end of the 19th century, and the line grew to 400 kilometers, and they would transport nearly 50 million passengers. So this gives you an idea of both the success of the Tranguai together with the remarkable development that the city was going through. This is a nice advertisement that I wanted to share with you, because it's advertising, nothing to do with trams. It's a completely different thing, but they said 90 years serving the country from the time of horse-drawn trams. So just to share with you the importance that tramways had in Buenos Aires at the time, but even today. So this is a list of the most important companies we could have found by the turn of the century, that is between the 90s and the 20th century. As I said, La Croce will survive for quite a long time. So will Anglo-Argentina, will become even more important. We will focus on those 2 later on. And there is a third one, which didn't last many years, but it became very, very important, La Capital, in the moment of the electrification of the lines. What we are seeing is the picture of the last horse-drawn tram, which rode the last time in 1925. Any questions that you would like to ask? Any comments, that anything that you would like to say until now?
Marcela, at the end, let's put all the questions at the end.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so we have a clear idea of how the city was developing, how it was growing in terms of industry, infrastructures, streets, means of transport. So the local government started pushing the different, because there were so many, the different tram companies to invest in electricity, which was, of course, not something that the local government intended to do. The companies, which were very comfortable at the time, made whatever they could to postpone this, which was a huge financial effort in the end, and they were supposed to do it on their own without any kind of financial aid from the local council. There was an American engineer in this moment, Charles Bright, he was from Ohio, I guess, that he could foresee the importance of electrification, and he asked for the permission to the city council to build an electric service. Consider that at the time, permits would take between 3, 6, or even a little bit more months to be granted. Of course, when the rest of the companies got to know this, they didn't like it very much, because it was a sort of disruption. In the end, they would have been supposed to do exactly the same kind of investment later on. So particularly the company Buenos Aires y Belgrano blocked the process by requesting the same permission and asking for some very tough conditions. Their intention was not to get awarded the permission, but to create a situation of conflict, to prevent Bright to built the first electric tram. Among the conditions that this company was asking, there were two very interesting. The first one that it was that they wanted a lifelong concession, whereas concessions tended to be done for 100 years pretty much, but not everlasting. And the second one was that they wanted to be able to use the tracks built by Bright. Okay, so this was their idea to stop drastically development. However, Bright decided to continue and to move forward in this investment, and he kind of found a way to unblock the situation by requesting a permit to run a test of a few months, of 3 months. So this was the first ride of an electric tram in Buenos Aires, again, as an experiment, as a short experiment, which was definitely successful. I know, sorry. The first ride was in 1897, April the 22nd, and the ride was for only 10 blocks, pretty much, carrying 36 passengers. The same year, La Sociedad de Tranvías La Capital started an electric service. In the end, Bright could get the permission for a regular service, rather because when the test was over, the success had been so huge that he got granted a permission to start a regular service. And also here, in the case of electricity, opponents were probably much more than the ones we could count with the horse-drawn trams. This is what it used to be one of the most, if not the most important magazine. Very, how can I say, for a very high level, a very high cultural and even language level, which was Caras y Caretas. And I found very funny, I hope you too, the poster that they created, because they consider the electric tram to be something definitely dangerous. And as we are going to see later on, it was definitely during the first times it was. This is another advert that I wanted to share with you, because this is about getting land, okay? Getting lots of land to build your own house or whatever. And one of the sentences they chose to trigger interest was opposite to Riachuelo and the tramway. So this is to give you an idea of the huge success that tramways in general and electricity in particular meant for this kind of city. Consider that by the time that George Clemenceau visited the city, many important politicians and nobles visited Buenos Aires in the 1910s, because it was the centenary of independence, okay? So there was a huge expo and so many different events. And George Clemenceau, I'm translated this by heart, said something like, porteños are the inhabitants of Buenos Aires, even used the tramway to go to the toilet. By the 20s, Buenos Aires had the highest rate on tram by inhabitant. That would be the calculation. By the 20s, the tram network will reach 875 kilometers length. By 1909, it was a considerable network, a little bit less than 700. And you can see that they would transport 325 million of passengers. Whereas in 1914, so 7-8 years after that, the line grew to almost its maximum length, because we are beyond 800 kilometers. Sorry, I forgot about highlighting again the three players and something very important that happens in this period. Material is mostly purchased during the first decade. That's why when we take a look at the cars, what we are going to see are the 1900s design. That is pretty much family-owned companies or private-owned companies start to be merged or acquired by mostly British finance companies. That's why in the end, after a decade or so, there will be only three very big players: La Capital, Anglo-Argentina, and La Croce. In the end, just in a few couple of years, La Capital will be acquired by another society and then sold a few years after that to Anglo-Argentina, and will be, as a matter of fact, Anglo-Argentina, the one who will have most of the control of Buenos Aires tramway network. Let's take a look at La Capital. La Capital was very characteristic because they would use the double-decker cars. It was started in 1887 by a small local entrepreneur, but it was suddenly acquired by the British company and renamed La Capital and Extensions. That was the real name. During its heydays, it was managed by an engineer, Theodore Weil, again here mostly called Weil. And this name will come back to again because there is a station called Weil and even a model called Weil. As I said, it was very famous because of the double-decker cars. They built a power plant which doesn't exist anymore, sadly, which was very, very innovative for the time. It was a power plant built considering a future development, okay? So we can see that from the number of boilers, because they just needed 2 boilers, but they decided to add other 2 for the future development. And they even have a sort of waiting room for the employees, so that they could go to the power plant and wait for the tram ride exclusively meant for the employees. This is Vale Station. How it used to be and how it looks now is in Boedo neighborhood, another neighborhood which had a huge development thanks to the tram. What we see in the old picture is an 1899 build station meant to transport again meat to Mataderos, where the slate house was. In 1909, La Capital is acquired by Anglo-Argentina. Actually, it was acquired first by another company and then resold to Anglo-Argentina. This station was then a workhouse and even a module of tram, we are going to see that later, were built there. Then it was abandoned for decades, and now it was reconverted into what it seems to be a lovely square. About Anglo-Argentina, there is a lot to say, and it will get back to us because from now on, it will be one of the, if not the biggest player of tram history in Argentina. It was a British company founded in London. In 1907, it merged with Sofina Group from Belgian capital. They managed to reach or to get control nearly in 80% of the whole tramway network in Buenos Aires, and they also extended the business to Rosario, which is a city nearby, having also in Rosario, a port which normally was used to be, and probably it's still today, a competitor of Buenos Aires port. Anglo-Argentina purchased most of their material, cars and motor cars, during the first decade of the century, between 1902 and 1904. They consider that they purchased 3,000 units, not 300, but 3,000 units. They had the biggest fleet in all Buenos Aires, and they would transport in the heyday something like 2 million passengers, sorry, 200 million passengers a year, 240 million passengers a year. Another investment that they made, and which is active still today, is what it's called el subte A, which is the metro, the A line. Lines have letters, not numbers, which operates still today. This is a separate chapter because also they are about the subway. There would be a lot to be said, but I fear that it won't be, time wouldn't be enough tonight, so we are going to just mention it. But if you happen to go there, it's worthwhile visiting it. I remember until a few decades ago, the old Anglo-Argentina cars will still run in the metro. So, as we said, they became the most important players, and they were somehow very influential also in political matters, and in laws and regulations and tenders and contracts. So this is the difference or the change in scenario that we will be facing from this moment on. By 1910, Tram was an absolute success. As we described before, most of the cars were acquired during this period. Just a few investments will be made from the 1910s until the 20th. And after that, the network will start to decay somehow. The last small investors or small, mostly family-owned companies will merge with one of these two, either with La Croce or mostly with Anglo-Argentina. In the picture, instead, we are seeing two different cars from two different companies. The first one is from 1907, La Compagnia Belga Argentina. So Belge design. These cars were designed by the Société Franco-Belge. And then also this company merged with Anglo-Argentina, whereas the second one was built in 1904, and these are German design. About the tram tickets, unlike in the case of Europe, the tickets were very cheap. They only costed 10 cents. And on top of that, there was what it's called a boleto obrero, which was for worker, which costed half of the value, so 5 cents. But you could purchase this ticket from 5 to 7 a.m. and you will have to return or to make your ride back within 4 p.m., which matches perfectly well the schedules of the factories at the moment. The problem was that there were different lines within the same company, and at the same time different companies, so each one of them having their own tickets. For that reason, by the turn of the century, a coupon was made available, which is very funny because it was a very complex, and you had boxes, and each controller was supposed to tick in one of those boxes, and there were some combinations possible. Not all the combinations were possible, but still that was a very rigid system but definitely much better than having to pay 10 cents every time you need to change tram to get to your destination. Another peculiarity, according to many articles of the time, is what is called in Spanish la coima. So what started to happen in this case between passengers and the controllers? As usual, not all the passengers had purchased previously the ticket. So in case they were caught by the controller, they would offer what is, it's even used today, this word, and very well used, la coima. So rather than paying 10 cents for the ticket, they would offer 8 cents to the controller. So the controller didn't report the ticket. The passenger would pay a lower value than the one of the ticket, and they were all very happy, except for the tram companies, which tried to fight against this consolidated culture of coima, I would say, without much success. That's the truth. We have here some different tickets, one from the Tramway Rural, the other one from Tranguais Eléctrico de Buenos Aires y Belgrano. These were how the tickets looked like at the time for you to have an idea. About the tram workers, in the first place, new professions were created, new job positions. And by the way, Anglo-Argentina developed later on their own academy, their own training academy. This was a very important collocation for immigrants. We will find actually in one of the articles that is going to be published about an accident, a disaster which happened in the 30s. The driver was an Italian immigrant and some Spanish too. They were so many because trams were so many, so they became quite an influential union in the end. Consider that in 1889, they made a strike. All workers from Anglo-Argentina, the other ones joined, and port workers joined too, and practically they stopped the city because they could handle that, they could afford that. If all the tramways go on strike, there was no other possible means of transport. They were, for this reason, very, very important during proletarian battles. And they were a very strong union. The union was formed in 1919 under the name of Unión Tranviaria Automotor, UTA, which is the name that still has today, even if trams don't exist anymore. This is another funny peculiarity of Buenos Aires tramways, which is the crinoline. You know, this used to be that kind of what women use under their dresses in the 16th and 17th century. So this crinoline in Spanish is known as miriñaque. And what happens here, since accidents had been so many, particularly during the first period, because of incompetence of operators and also imprudence of passengers and pedestrians. So neighbors made several complaints to the local country. They been concerned about the number of incidents. As a result, in 1899, there was a local law making these fenders mandatory for all the tramways in Buenos Aires. This law was never stopped, and so it was until the very last day. We see in the picture the first ride with one of these miriñaque, that is the way that it was called, because the fender looked, you know, like one of those miriñaques or crinolines that ladies would wear under their dresses. And this is something very, very characteristic from Buenos Aires tram, that if you look around, you will see this in every single picture. The special service were the palace cars, which were luxury cars, definitely rather expensive, not for not a 10 cents ride, and they were exclusively meant for sightseeing. What we are seeing in the picture is the white car from Anglo-Argentina. Consider that the Prince of Wales traveled in that. George Clemenceau too, when they visited Buenos Aires in 1910 for the centenary of the independence. The seats of this car were in leather, and they were independent seats. Well, here we can see some, how can I say, not nobles, because we didn't have that, but very important people, some VIP taking a ride on the white car, El Coche Blanco of Anglo-Argentina. We have talked about gaucho before, and I guess that the other idea that you may have when you think about Buenos Aires is tango. Well, Tram got even inside of tango. I don't know if you're aware of who that man in the picture is. That man was Jacques Moisgardet. He was French, but he was the most important tango singer, and he would live in Buenos Aires. It's said, this is there is no way to know whether this is true or false. He died being very, very young in an airplane accident in 1930s in Medellin, Colombia. Many people died in that accident, only a few survived. And one of those who survived always told that when the airplane started to run, Gardel said, "This looks like a lacrosse," or "This moves like a lacrosse." That part is not clear. Just to give you an idea that lacrosse was synonym of tram, as Anglo, for Anglo-Argentina, was synonym of tram too. And we can find at least, maybe there might be some more, tango song dedicated to trams, or in which tramways are part of the subject. Talan Talan, El Cornetín del Tranvía. El Cornetín was what I was talking to you about before. The horn is the word for horn. El Mayoral, which was that man riding, the groom riding a horse and announcing with the horn the pass of the tramway. So they became so important that even tango decided to immortalize trams. They had a huge impact also in language. As we saw from the presentation, the word until the 1910s, I would say, was tranguai. Not tramway, but the accent in the Y, tranguai. And then it became tranvia, which is the Spanish word used in all over Latin America and Spain as well, to denote this means of transport. On top of that, there is a very common word in Lunfardo, which is not a language itself, because it doesn't change the structure of the language, but it's like a sort of dialect, typically from Buenos Aires. And this is a word that we all use, bondi, when we mean bus. Me tomo el bondi, I'm taking the bus. This word bondi comes from a Portuguese Brazilian word, which was bond, used to call the trams. That was the word bond that Brazilians used to refer to trams in the previous century. And from there, the bondi, which now means the bus, the first enemy, which started in 1828 in Buenos Aires. The last one, which is my favorite one, is to be in Pampa y la Vía, estar en Pampa y la Vía. This is an expression which means to be penniless, not to have any money. Where does this expression come from? Because there was, at the time we are seeing this, is this picture, There was a free service, by the way, collecting passengers from that corner, from the street Pampa and the railway tracks, and bringing them, this was the tram, you see, National Hippodrome, bringing people from the Hippodrome. So what happened that for people losing all the money in the Hippodrome, the only thing that they could afford was to take the free service, but the free service ended up in Pampa y la Via. So after that, they would be stuck in that place, which this is a picture from the 60s, how it looked like, and this is how it looks like now. So it's very commonly used, this expression, even today, and it's strictly related to trams. So we can say that they were so important that they even changed language as well. Let's take a look at some electric cars from the different companies for you to have an idea of what we had at in that moment. Consider that some very common models are not to be found here because, as we stated before, mostly the material was purchased in the first decade and in the first years, I would say, of the 20th century. Sorry. As we said, La Capitale was their characteristic was the use of imperiales, double-decker cars. They had a fleet of presumably more than 60 cars. 41 were ordered at the very beginning of electrification in 1897, and then they made further orders by the turn of the century. In 1908, La Capitale was acquired by Gran Nacional, which at the same time, a year after that, in 1909, it was acquired or merged with Anglo-Argentina. The value of the deal was more than £1 million, which in that moment, I assume, it was quite a big deal, quite a lot of money. The other one that I wanted to share with you are los cerveceros. Cerveza in Spanish means beer. And you know that there is a city named Quilmes. This would be 20 kilometers south from Buenos Aires, which takes the name Quilmes from the Indians living there, Los Quilmes. And there was an important industry, beer industry, blonde beer, by the way. So these cerveceros, these kind of trams, were meant, as you can see, those were cargo trams, to bring the beer from Quilmes to the different markets in the city. They started in 1904, and the complete fleet was about nearly 37 streetcars. As we are going to, as you may be noticing by the pictures, cars will be and will remain like that, mostly 2 or 4 axle. We are not going to see probably any other kind of technology because the material that was purchased was the one that remained for decades. The other curiosity are what were called Clásicos de Puerto. Clásicos de Puerto, the name of the company was the Buenos Aires Town and Dock Tramway Company, founded by British capitals in 1907. And the idea was to connect the whole port system or the different terminals of the port. That was the idea. It started in Retiro, which is one of the most important points in Buenos Aires right now, and would cover all the south until getting to Lanús Avellaneda, which we can consider as the end of the harbor terminals. There were some different cars used. 2 types were manufactured in Britain, but there was the third one that is the one that we are looking at, which was manufactured locally. And this was the one named Clásico de Puerto. The fleet had around 30 streetcars. And in the picture that we are seeing, it's that same car in the 1930s. They were light green in the upper part of the body and dark green in the lower one. And they served quite a lot of time, until the 50s. The St. Louis cars, which is my understanding that still something remains, from the Compañía Eléctricos del Sur, Compañía de Tranguais Eléctricos del Sur, as a matter of fact. They had quite a long line, 25 kilometers, and they would start in the city center and carry passengers to the south, the southern suburb of Buenos Aires. Consider that not only we are talking about a huge city, but also having huge suburbs. So you have the northern suburb, the western, and the southern too. This one was particularly long, 25 kilometers. Therefore, they needed cars with a remarkable capacity. Their color were brown, and these cars were manufactured by the American Brill Corporation. They purchased first 12 streetcars plus other 10 that they had. Those last 10 were manufactured locally by the same society. Also, these ones were very common in Buenos Aires until the 40s, pretty much. La Croce Classics. Unlike Anglo-Argentina, which preferred British manufacturing, La Croce took their chances with American manufacturing. They had also quite an impressive fleet. It was composed by 300 cars, mostly purchased between 1907 and 1914, all of them manufactured by the Brill company. The innovation of these cars is that they were closed, unlike the first time of the British models that tended to be opened. Actually, you are going to take a look now when Anglo-Argentina had purchased those cars, were open, and after a few years, they decided to close it. The color of La Croce was definitely green in the lower part, and then there was something white in the higher part. Also, these cars served until the 1950s, pretty much. Let's go to take a look at some curiosities of Anglo-Argentina's fleet now. We have just a few. These are the Dickers. They were very, very popular, and there were so many. Consider that the whole fleet was something like 500 cars, manufactured, of course, by Dicker, the British company, and they were also called Buenos Aires. Rather than saying Anglo, they would be called at the time Buenos Aires because they were so characteristics. This is what I was talking about before. We have the original tram in the open version, and then they were closed in the workhouse, talleres caseros. And this is an example of a very important and I would say determinant type of car of those days. There also were another car model, which were Los Belgas. That's the way they are called, the Belge. That's the meaning of the word. They were purchased in the second decade of the century, between 1912 and 1915, pretty much, and they were manufactured by Boom and Marpent, the Belgian company. That's why they were called the Belge, actually. There were two versions, anchos y angostos, which would be the anchos had the regular width, whereas the angostos were a little bit higher than the regular measured of the time. Many of these were reconverted. We are going to see that too in the 50s. And about reconversion of or recarrozados is the name of the process in Spanish. By the end of the 20s, some cars started to be reconverted, and these are some of the models. This is the part we can say in which Buenos Aires cars completely separate to what was the trend of the rest of the cities in the world, because practically materials stopped to be purchased, so they had to start manufacturing by reconverting existing material. There were three models very characteristic too. One were the caseros, which took the name, we are going to see this as a trend also in the future, we took the name from the office in which they were built. Caseros were built using brill trucks, and they were very, very robust. The performance was great, and they ran until almost until the end, until the 60s too. Then CATITA. CATITA is an acronym for Compañía Argentina de Talleres Industriales de Transportes y Afines. So CATITA sounds much better. Those were built in the 30s, in the 1929, and it was like a PCC kind. We can consider them the local PCC model. Also here there were two versions, standard and extra largos. The extra largos, of course, reaching the capacity of 40 seats, where the other ones, the standard, would have only 36 seats. There were so many of these cars, and many of them made it until the dismission, which was in the 63. This is an overview of the first period, the one of the development, and the kind of situation and cars we could have found in that moment. By the 30s, the Argentinian picture in general, and Buenos Aires in particular, changes quite a lot. This is a picture of one of the streets in Buenos Aires in 1936, so you just can imagine and have an idea of how it was trying to take a tram in that situation. The city was already crowded. We can also say that the immigration process was about to end or being frozen for some decades until the end of World War II. And one of the most important changes that trams had to accommodate to was the bus, which made the first ride in 1928. The tramway network was in a very good shape in the sense of length, because they had reached 800 kilometers. They had more than 3,000 streetcars, 100 train lines, but it wasn't in a wonderful shape when we consider the seniority of cars and material in general. On top of that, there was, sorry, a coup d'état, el golpe, as it's normally called in Spanish, which probably made that interest that we had seen in the previous centuries in Buenos Aires development decrease. Therefore, British investors started to, little by little, retire or focusing in some other areas of the world, but certainly they kept the business in Argentina, but wouldn't invest on it anymore. This is how the network looked by 1936. Anglo-Argentina is the blue, the light blue one. The green one is, of course, La Croce. And then we have Tranvías Eléctricos del Sur and Tranvías del Puerto. So it's clear, it appears very clear that the difference between in volume of business, and also in kilometers of line between Compañía Anglo-Argentina and the rest of them, even La Croce, was very, very important. In this scenario, of course, the companies started to lose money, started to feel their business threatened somewhat. And as we said, to avoid that failure, and most probably because of the influence of Anglo-Argentina, the local government decides to take a more active role, or at least more than they did in the past. They create what it was a short life company, Corporación de Transportes de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires. One of the reasons why this was created was indeed to try to avoid, or at least postpone, the failure of the different tramway companies. Corporación theoretically was a joint among all the tram companies, transport companies, plus the local government. But in practice, it was mostly controlled by Anglo-Argentina. At this time, the Corporación decided to reorganize the lines, which was a very good decision, because by the time the lines had been planned, probably the situation in those 20 or 30 years had remarkably changed. They also changed the color to silver and blue. As I said, Corporación had a very short and struggled life, because it lasted only 12 years. And in every year, they reported loss. In the end, British companies stopped investing, particularly Anglo-Argentina, and by the end of World War II, Anglo-Argentina filed for bankruptcy. This was in 1948. This is what it used to be Anglo-Argentina offices, the one in the picture. In front of that, of the bankruptcy of Anglo-Argentina, the decision was to end the Corporación and to convert into a national asset all the transports. This happened to trams, to subways, which were highly developed too, and to trains, whereas buses kept the model that trams had at the very beginning. That is to say, the models of small companies owning a couple of lines. In the end, Anglo-Argentina made a trial, or sued the local government, considering responsible of the failure because of all the failures of Corporación. They won the trial, and I'm trying to remember the amount, but was quite impressive. The trial was done in Buenos Aires, and it was indeed an Argentinian judge that in 1965 asked the local government to pay £7 million to Anglo-Argentina. That amount of money was paid until the 1980s, and after they received the last rate, the last installment, the society was finally liquidated. So this was the end of Anglo-Argentina. What happened to the rest of them? What happened to La Croce, which was the other survivor? So when Corporación ended in 1949, everything was reorganized. Consider that there was Juan Domingo Perón at the time, which was a nationalistic government. So the decision was to remove the transport for private hands and to take ownership was supposed to be taken by the government. Therefore, transports were organized in TVA, Transportes de Buenos Aires, in 1949. And trams belong to Transportes de Buenos Aires. For the subway, a different segment was created, Subterráneo de Buenos Aires. The buses remain, as I said before, mostly owned by private capitals, and the railways became Ferrocarriles Argentinos. That was the structure that carried on until a new democratic regime started in 1983, but it will still take some time. In this period and in this situation, of course, it's impossible to imagine that Buenos Aires would have been able to follow the rest of the, or the same trend as the rest of the world. So they started to reconvert the old cars, and they did a very good job in the sense that cars' performance was indeed excellent, very robust, very tough cars, but the design is rather peculiar. So from now on, every time you see one of these pictures, those bus looking like trams, you will already know that they may belong to Buenos Aires. So los recarrozados means the reconverted is the term, the Spanish term for reconvert. Mostly the local council investments were focusing on the metro, on the subway. So with all that obsolete material, they decided to use their imagination and focusing in strength and in performance rather than design. This was the trend until the last day of tramways. Some of the models were the veils, which here we will see that they take the name from the headquarters in which they were built. These were manufactured in the old La Capitale station and depot. You see that the design was kind of bus looking like, but they had some innovations such as the sliding doors and the low floor. It's not known, or is at least not easy to find, how many of these cars were built. But what is certain is that they ride until the last day of tramways. The Tassara is another example. We are now in the 1950s, 1951. There's an exception because in this case, they take the name of the creator, the engineer Tassara. There were two versions, concave or straight front. We can see both of them. And the innovations that were introduced here were the padded seats and the handrail. We can see the internal of this type of car in the picture. The last two of the recarrozados, and we are getting to the end of the story, were the Estomba and Fabricaciones Militares. Fabricaciones Militares would be the military factory. That would be the translation. Estomba were manufactured in the depot of Estación Estomba, that was from the ex-La Croce tramways. Nearly 260 cars were manufactured, and they were very, very good performance. There were so many of them by the time of the dismission. Then we have the last model, Fabricaciones Militares, which was prototyped in 1954, but it was manufactured some years after that by Fabricaciones Militares. So this is the kind, I wanted to share these pictures with you because it seems very, very to me at least, very unique cars and very peculiar too. We are getting to the end. We are in the 60s now. Just an overview of which the evolution was. By 1950s, there were 68 tramway lines, whereas in the 60s, it dropped to 44 lines. In the 1961, there was a dismissal decree from the Buenos Aires City Council. What it was said is that the trams will be able to run until December the 25th, 1962. The last two trams made the last ride on March the 13th of 1962. The lines were the 84 and the 99. After that, in the month of December 62, a sort of farewell parade, which is called la despedida in Spanish, was organized in Belgrano, a neighborhood, which used to be outside Buenos Aires, but then was sent, is now part of the city of Buenos Aires. There was a parade with a horse-drawn tram, followed by some electric cars. You can see that in the picture. And I mean, this was a short parade. And then in the end, they enter the depot and they stayed there for quite a long time. Many decades after that last ride, there was a project called Tranviarie. I remember taking this tram, which was honestly a complete failure. There were just two cars provided by the Mulhouse City Council. One of the reasons, there are so many, but they were using the old tracks from the Ferrocarril Ensenada. So that is to say, covering all the part of the river. It was rather expensive. And it kind of didn't make sense because the line was very, very close to different avenues, very well covered by bus lines. So it didn't make sense probably to take that tram. The frequency was also quite long because they would pass every 20-25 minutes. And in the end, the project failed, and sadly, the cars were abandoned there, and it was dismissed in 2012. Nothing more after that, not at least that I know. This is the bibliography in which I base. A special thanks to Aquilino Podesta for those wonderful articles and pictures that he publishes online, sharing with everybody. And thank you for having listened and participated to the presentation. Open to any questions you may have, if you are still there. I hope so.